Okay, we have a lot to cover. This isn't going to cover literally everything in Inkscape, but it's going to be a pretty in-depth tutorial, especially for those of you using it to create things like disc golf stencils for disc golf dying. But even if you're not, this will be helpful for just learning Inkscape in general. So the program's called Inkscape. Just Google it. It'll be the first link, or go to inkscape.org. Going to go to download, current stable version. This is going to automatically detect what platform you're on. So it'll tell you what version you need here. You can just click here. But if you don't trust that, you can also go to this all platforms here. And then it'll allow you to download for Linux, Windows, or Mac specifically. An additional tip I'm including here is if you are a Google Chrome user, you can get this extension called Save Image As Type. And this makes it so when you get an image from the internet, normally you just right click and click Save Image As, but sometimes it's like a WebP file or something stupid like that. This will give you an additional option that says Save Image As Type, and you can force it to be a JPEG or a PNG. That doesn't mean it'll automatically have a clear background, but it will force it to be that file type, and I find this useful for 99% of the pictures I'm downloading. So anyways, download Inkscape, get it installed, and then we can move on. So when you first open Inkscape, it's going to have a menu that I think you just click New Document at the bottom right-hand corner, and it will open up a new document that should look like this. There's a few things to go over, but your screen may look a little bit different than mine, and that's okay. I'm going to show you the panels and windows that you're going to want, and I promise you you're going to want all of them. They're very useful, but even if you miss this part, just know that you can get them back whenever you want. So right now on the right-hand side, I only have this Layers and Objects panel open. If you don't have that, you're going to go to Object and go to Layers and Objects. The next one you're going to want is also under Object. It's called Fill and Stroke. And then the next one you're going to want is also under Object. At the very bottom, Align and Distribute. That's going to help us center things. We'll get to that later. And the last one you're going to want is under Path. Go to Trace Bitmap. All four of these panels are going to be the most useful for us. Now, what I like to do next is actually just go over the hotkeys that are also useful. If you hold Control and zoom in and out with your scroll wheel on your mouse, that's helpful. And then if you hold Spacebar, that's going to actually allow you to move around your document using your cursor as an anchor. That's very helpful. This page in the middle is going to be useful as well for centering, but just know you can really design off of it anywhere in this document. It's not that important, but this does become useful when we use things like centering. And so let's actually change this page to be the same size as our disk. Even though it's a square, it's still going to be useful to change it to the same size. So go to File, Document Properties. And then under Document Properties and Display and Page, under Format, you're going to change this from millimeters to inches. In most disks that I find, at least drivers, are 8.3 inches by 8.3. So that's what we're doing for the width and the height. And there we go. Now our page is 8.3 by 8.3, but we need to add our disk stencil. So this is a good time to talk about the toolbar on the side. We're not going through all of these, but the ones that are most useful are the selector tool. This will allow you to select objects. This node tool will allow you to select different anchor points within your stencil once you make them. And then you have your shape tools. You would think these just make shapes, but Inkscape is kind of dumb. You can't just do simple things like cropping. And so your shape tools are going to let you do that as a workaround. So anyways, we're going to make our disk outline that I like to use as a template. So we're going to select our ellipse tool, and you can just drag out like this, and it'll probably be a white circle for you, but it's not actually like a perfect size. Like if I did that again in a really obvious way, it's more of an oval, right? And so what you can do instead when you drag these out is you can hold the Control key and it'll be more uniform. But even if you don't do that, I just want you to know that you can select this as an object and it'll give you its properties in this top toolbar when it's selected. And then you can go to the width and the height, go to inches, and we're going to change it to our disk size, whatever disk size you have. But 8.3 by 8.3 is typically what it is. Make sure that this lock is either locked or unlocked. It doesn't really matter. It's just going to keep your proportions the same. So if you're having issues, just unlock this and you can change these individually. I'm going to keep it locked. Okay. So your disk probably, or your circle rather, probably looks like this. And to get an outline like I have, you're going to go to Fill and Stroke, which is that panel we added earlier. And then we have our fill. I like to actually do no fill. So I click this X for no paint. And then I go to Stroke and click Flat Color. And then you can even go to Stroke Style and you can change the thickness of this outline. I think I normally do like 0.700 millimeters. That seems to be a good rule of thumb. So now we have this circle with no fill in the middle and just an outline to kind of represent our disc. So you could just drag it and try to center it here, but let's be accurate and learn this skill for later when you're trying to center your design anyway. Select your object, and you're gonna go to the Align and Distribute panel. Again, if you don't have that, you can go to Object and then down to Align and Distribute, and he'll add it here. But when you have this selected, you can see it says relative to, and then we have this drop-down arrow. Page is an option. That's why we have this page from earlier, and that's why we sized it. It's gonna be useful here. So now if I hit center on vertical axis, it'll center it vertically with our page, and then I can click center on horizontal axis, and it'll center it horizontally. And now you can see if I zoom in, it's like perfectly centered to the very edge. So now let's get to the point where you probably want to get to, which is actually adding your images into this program and creating stencils from them. Okay, I've created a new document just for the sake of speeding things up a little bit. So it may look a little bit different, but this is pretty much where we left off. So in order to import the image and make a stencil from it, you're gonna go to File, Import, and then pick an image like this one, for example. And I always leave all of these PNG bitmap image import options. I leave them on default, and I click OK. And it'll put it somewhere random in your document. Now keep in mind, this is kind of like the circle from earlier. If you try to make this bigger, this one's actually staying proportionate because I have the lock checked, but sometimes it'll do this whole thing. And if that happens, you can always hit Edit Undo or Control Z, and then you can hold the Control key and it'll actually shift or enlarge appropriately when you have the Control key held down. But anyways, let's talk about what makes a good reference image for a stencil, because some things just straight up aren't gonna work. And this is gonna take some practice and getting used to know what will and won't work. So I have some good examples here. So for starters, I would avoid any colored image as best you can, especially any colored image that has kind of shading. The best example on this image is going to be that his tongue goes from pinkish, dark pink to light pink here, and that really messes with a stencil. Now, you probably also noticed that when I zoom in on any of these images, we can see these fuzzy pixels, right? When you really get in there, it just kind of comes a blurred mess. We don't want that. We're going to create a stencil from this that creates smooth lines, because it's going to convert these into a vector image is what it's called. Okay. But anyways, with this image selected, if I were to try to make a stencil from it, I would have it selected. And then again, you can go to Path and then Trace Bitmap, and it'll be over here in this panel. Now, with this image selected, it's going to show us a preview of what the stencil will look like. Obviously, that doesn't look great. Now, to mess with it and to make it a little bit better, we have this detection mode. I leave it on brightness cutoff. You can mess with these other ones if you want, but I leave them on brightness cutoff. And then you mess with the threshold. Dragging it to the left-hand side is going to create less detail. And then dragging it to the right-hand side is going to create more detail. So you kind of want to find the sweet spot. However, I'm not going to use this image because, as you can see on his tongue, for example, where I showed that kind of gradient coloring, it really just becomes kind of a black speckled mess in the middle. And even if I drag less and less and less and less detail, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty good, it's not perfect. There's still areas that are just, I don't know, they don't work that well, like the shading above his eyebrows, for example. Just any colored image I tend to have a lot of issues with. Yes, you can edit it even further once you get the trace, which we'll get to, but it's just best to avoid these images. So you might find an image like this and think, oh, it's black and white, it's perfect. Well, this is actually a drawing, and the shading technique that they used is a ton of tiny little black lines that are just kind of scratched in there. And as you can see from our stencil, not only is that going to take you hours to weed out, but your Cricut machine's not going to like that. Anything with tiny, or whatever kind of vinyl cutting machine you have, anything with really tiny multiple lines, it really doesn't read that well. And even furthermore, if it did read it perfectly, it's still going to tear up your vinyl because it's got to cut such tiny, precise lines. And when they blend together, it just becomes a mangled mess. It's just not good to have. Here's another example with a bunch of tiny lines in it. It looks great, but really, if you think about it, when your Cricut is cutting all of this out, it's just going to be way too close for comfort, and it's going to create a lot of torn up holes in your vinyl. You're not going to be able to weed it out. You're not going to be able to peel it off. It's just best to avoid things like that. Even a simple design like a spiral like this looks cool, looks easy, but when you really zoom in, this one goes all the way deep into the center until you can't even see anything happening and it doesn't have any definition anymore. If I were to try to create a stencil from this, even if I create the threshold until it meets the middle somewhere around here and click apply, which again, we'll talk about how to do this in a second, but let's just say I created a stencil. This is our stencil version now. When I zoom in, it just kind of becomes a mangled mess in the middle and just a black spludge. Like that doesn't look really good to have on a disc. Even if I were to do this and, you know, have a threshold be a little bit less, somewhere in the sweet spot, try to find it, maybe around there, it's still a mangled mess in the middle. So you want to avoid any kind of like tiny, crazy amount of black lines I've found. Okay, now let's move on to good images, what you do want to look for. These are going to be the two that we're going to work with today. This one is extremely simple, but as you can remember, this is just a PNG or a JPEG. So when we zoom in on it, it's got these blurry, pixelated, bad lines. That's why we're creating a vector image in the first place. So with this selected, I now have the option to create a vector from it. And as I mentioned earlier, you can mess with this threshold to get the sweet spot. And you could just hit apply when you're satisfied. By the way, I leave speckles, smooth corners, and optimize default. And you can also click this invert image box. I didn't mention that earlier, but if you wanted to change what you're, stenciling out, for example. Anyways, once you're satisfied, you just hit apply, and it's going to create your stencil directly on top of your image. So now I can just drag this over with our select tool, and this is actually the stencil that we would work with. Now, if I click our node tool here, it shows me all the different nodes that this traced bitmap is made of now. And what's cool is we can actually manipulate these nodes. So let's say I wanted his tail to be a little bit longer. I can just drag this out to a point. And now that's actually part of the image. Pretty cool, right? The other thing is each of these nodes usually have handles, these little circles that appeared when I clicked on this. And when I drag these handles, it allows us to adjust the actual curvature of these anchor points. This is going to take some getting used to, but it's very, very useful. Now, let's move on to a more complicated stencil and show you why this is so useful in the first place. Moving up to this crazy image here. This has got a lot of lines in it. If I have this selected, a good rule of thumb for these kind of complicated images is going to be that I mess with the threshold in 3 different ways. I'll do one at 0.25 and hit enter, and then I'll hit apply, drag that off to the side. I'll select our image again and do another one at 0.45, hit apply, drag that off to the side. And then I'll do another one at 0.75 and hit apply and drag that off to the side. Now I do this because now I can look at all 3 and figure out which one is going to be best for me. This one's pretty obvious because we have a lot of broken lines in the first 2, but sometimes you'll see that stencils really don't change much from version to version, and it's just about picking one that you like the most. Okay, so this one is pretty good. I think it's going to work well. But as you can see, there's definitely things that I would change. Like if I zoom in here, you can see that his finger is kind of broken. We have lines that don't connect. I don't love that. So I'll show you how to fix that with the nodes. The other thing though is I don't need all of these damage lines, all of this like rough and scruff on his pants, for example. Like it's not super important to the design to have every single one of them. I want to keep most of them, but like this one, for example, do I really need that or that? So I can just go to the node tool and then select a line or our image. You can see all the nodes that this is made up of, and I can just zoom in and select all of these nodes, for example, and hit delete. Drag a box around these, hit delete. Drag a box around these, hit delete. Even if you wanted to do it just one by one, you could do that as well. Click on these, delete, 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 and delete. So that's one way to edit your stencil, which is really nice. But the other thing is like connecting lines. That can be really, really useful for a stencil like this. where he has these broken fingers. What you have to remember is that a vinyl cutting machine is going to read any overlapping lines as one line, and you can use this to your advantage. So I'm going to take this node here, and I'm going to drag it in until it overlaps. So now it just reads it as one line, and it looks like his finger is connected. And you can kind of do the same here, and it's going to take some getting used to because it may not be perfect, but if I don't like the curvature of this, or I think that's like too fat of a curve now, I can mess with these handles and make it just right for me, right? So again, it's going to take practice. That's still not even great, but this is part of creating a stencil. This is why it takes so much time. Okay. I'm going to cover two more things, which are going to be fixing lines like this or creating your own lines. And then we're going to cover cropping after that. So if I go to this node tool and I select him again, first of all, we don't need this. This is a strand of hair that didn't get fully traced. If I go over to the reference image, you can see it's that thin line there. Okay. Now I personally love the little skinny strands of hair on Goku, but I don't need the one here. So I'm just going to get rid of it. I do, however, always like when he's pictured with it on kind of the top of his head. And that didn't really get transferred over here very well. And so instead of trying to mess with these nodes and get it perfect and mess with it that way, I'm just going to get rid of these altogether. And instead, I'm going to draw my own line and make it a part of this image. The way to do that is I'm going to go to the pen tool here and then click here. And this will take some practice, but it's going to first create a straight line. So click here, and you do also have to close this, okay? So now I'm going to go back to the first point and click here, and now it is a line. Now, it's obviously a straight line. So how do we fix that? Well, we just go to our nodes, click on the line, and you'll notice there's no handlebars on these nodes like the other ones, so we can't actually add a curve. So all you have to do is actually just hold Shift and then drag out on this, and it'll create a handle. And you can even do it again and have two handles. So now I can really mess with this and make it as thin as I want and curve it the way that I want. And again, I'm not going to spend forever on this for the sake of this tutorial, but you get the idea. Now it kind of looks like that strand of hair, right? Especially zoomed out. It's pretty close. Now, you have to note though, if you're going to create your own lines like this, they're not connected to the image. If I went to move this object, that strand of hair is just chilling there. So what do? I'm going to hit Edit Undo or Control Z so that he's positioned correctly. And then you can either drag until everything's selected like this. So now you can see that strand of hair is selected and our stencil is selected. And now I can right click and click Group. And now it's all together as one. That's one way to do it. Or, well, it's actually, I went too far back. Or the other thing you could do though, is you can go to your layers panel, layers and objects, and this will show you every single pen thing that you've done, all the images. And so now if I go here, I notice this path 14 is that strand of hair. I could even title it that if I want. And I can select that and then find the actual stencil image. So I can title this Goku stencil just so I know. And now I can just select these two layers, right click on them, and then hit Group. And now it put it into one folder that I can just title Goku stencil again for the sake of understanding when I'm looking at this really quick. And now it's in a folder, but they are grouped together and I can move it around. So I find that really useful. Now, the last thing that I'm going to show you is if you do have a crazy image that you're trying to work with and you just need to kind of crop it, it's a little different in Inkscape, so let's cover it. Okay, so we're going to go over cropping, and then I forgot I also need to show you how to export your stencil. But for cropping, Inkscape's a little bit weird, like I mentioned earlier. You can't just select this and hit Edit Crop. Let's say you didn't really want anything below the chest, or you just have a crazy image with a bunch of stuff you don't need. You actually have to crop this using a shape tool, but we can use this to our advantage, and it's really nice for discs specifically, which I'll get to in a moment. But the way that we're going to do this is I'm showing you this is not actually a stencil. This is an image. It's just black and white. You can see how pixelated it is. Let's say you want to start by cropping it. all you have to do is go to the rectangle tool, and then you're going to drag out a rectangle in the area that you want your crop. Okay, so everything within this square is what I want. Now, again, yours might come out as like a black square or something, so just select your square and make sure that your fill and stroke is correct. So the fill would be no paint, and then stroke, I always just do, you know, flat color and make it black, and then, I don't know, 1.160 millimeters, I guess, but that seems to be perfect for me. So now I can actually see what's within it. But anyways, let's say I'm like, yep, I want it cropped right about there. What you would do is you need your square selected, and then you're going to hold shift because you're also going to select your image. So with both selected, now I can go to object, clip, and set clip. And you can see it cropped it to just be that square. So that square no longer exists. It just cropped my image that was behind it to be in the same size. So where this becomes useful for discs especially, I'm hitting edit undo by the way, is if you have your image or your stencil and you want to put it on your disc and you want it to fit within the circle perfectly and be cut off so you can see what that would look like, it's perfect for that. So let's say I wanted to trace bitmap this, make it my stencil. I'll just say that I'm happy with it as is. We can get rid of our original image. So here's our stencil, right? If I zoom in, perfectly crisp and clear, here's our stencil. I want to center this to our disc. So first of all, I don't know if I showed you that earlier, for our images at least, you can select this as an object and then go to align and distribute. And then relative to page, you're going to hit center on vertical axis, center on horizontal. Now it's perfectly centered. Doesn't really look like it because Gohan's kind of positioned weirdly and has large hair, but I promise you this is perfectly centered. Okay. So it's a little weird to me that designs like this are on discs because they just get cut off as like a square at the bottom. I don't like that look. I want it to fit the actual disc and just be cut off with the rim. Okay. So what we can do is select this and holding control, make sure that it actually scales appropriately. And we can make it a little bit bigger and put center or put Gohan somewhere in the center here, like maybe there. And then I'm going to hit center vertically, center horizontally. So he's actually center. It'll cut off a little bit of his hair, but for the sake of this example, maybe it's fine. Let's do it one more time. There we go. So now you can see some of him is off of the disc and we're going to have him cut right there. So now what you can do is you can actually grab the ellipses tool and you can create another circle. Make sure that it's the exact same size as our disc stencil outline. So in this case, it would be 8.3 by 8.3. We're going to center it to the page, center vertical, center horizontal. So now it's directly on top. And what I can do is also select Gohan. So I have this circle that we just made selected, but I'm going to hold shift and select Gohan in the middle. So now they're both selected and I can hit object, clip, set clip, and look at that. Now he's cropped perfectly at the rim. I did a bad job of not aligning his torso there, but you can see what I mean, right? He's actually cropped there. His arms are cropped off to hit the perfect curvature of the disc. And so it really does work. And if I wanted to like, you know, really make this perfect for the sake of the example, we'll do this again. And we'll just drag him down a hair, even though he's not perfectly centered, just so you can see that it works. Boom, done. So that's just a couple of the things that I find really useful in Inkscape. Okay, now let's move on. I still don't think I did a good job here. No, I did. Okay, good. So anyways, the way that you would export this now is I just usually want the actual stencil itself because I do all the centering in Cricut, which I can do another video on later if you're interested in that. Because that part's important. However, to get this out of this program, we don't want the page in the background and we don't want the circle. So normally what you can do is you could just drag this off and you can see now it's actually cropped and curved, which actually looks really cool on its own. You can drag this off and export it. But what I like to do is just leave it on the disk. And with this selected and only our stencil selected now, you can actually go to your export options. So I'm going to go to File, and then I'm going to go to Export. And this will open yet another panel over here. And this is really important because it can be frustrating if you do it wrong, trying to figure out why it's not working. But it gives you a couple options when you export it. You can either export your entire document, which we don't want to do because if I were to have, I don't know, a random thing out in the middle of nowhere, like the square here. Now, if we look at our export, you can see, oh, look, it has like all these squares here and then our stencil down here. It's trying to export the entire document. So we don't want that. Okay. So you could also just export the page itself, but that's going to include our circle and I don't want that either. So what I like to do is select just our stencil and then go to selection. And now it's only going to export the selection, even if it looks like it has that square in there, or that circle rather. I promise you this is just displaying what you have selected. And so with this selected now, all I have to do is go to export selected only. And that way that circle in the background is not going to be a big deal for us. And then you can actually go down to where it's going to save and see what kind of file type it's going to save as. And so the Cricut software for me seems a little bit finicky, to be dead honest. So I always change this to plain SVG and make sure it's at the path where I want. Because you could click here and make sure to change it to, you know, like your desktop, for example. But you notice save as type, it's changed back to PNG for some stupid reason. So I do plain SVG, and then I do another export at Inkscape SVG, and then I do another export at PNG. Because sometimes the Cricut software, it just doesn't like the one that I give it. But usually between those three, one of those options works. So yeah, you would just select your stencil, go to export, and then make sure your export selected only. I feel like I didn't do a good job explaining that. Export selected only box is checked, and then make sure that it's whatever file type you want. I usually do all three: SVG, Inkscape SVG, and then PNG. And between those three, one of them works well in Cricut, and then you would just hit export and it'll export to where you selected. Okay, I think that's everything.